Unfortunately, progress at the piano is not just about effort, it's also about direction. These six piano mistakes might be steering you off course, and you can't get back on track if you don't even know that you're off. I've created a Google Doc with resources, many of them free, that can help you get started with course correction. You can check it out at the link in the description. The insights in this video that I'm going to share with you come from discovering what works during my nearly 50 years of performing and teaching. Some of my advanced students have even won international competitions and performed on NPRs from the top. So let's dive in. Most people are practicing too fast and they're practicing sections that are too long. One funny story that I heard recently was a piano teacher said to the student, "If you can play that correctly, I'll give you this bill." And she pulls out a bill out of her wallet, and by mistake, she pulls out a $100 bill instead of a $1 bill. The student eyes get really big. So if someone said to you, "I'm going to give you $100 if you can play this 100% correctly on the very first try," what speed would you be going? That is your crucial speed that you want to be practicing at when you're trying to learn your notes, your rhythms, and your fingerings. This doesn't apply once you've got all that basic learning down. That's a whole nother ball of wax. But when you're learning your piece, you're building in that muscular coordination. You want to be practicing at a speed where you can get it 100% right 99.9% of the time. Another key thing that most people get wrong is they practice sections that are too long. We are all playing music because we love music. So once you kind of get going with playing your piece, it's enjoyable. You want to keep hearing the flow. So it's hard to stop. One trick you can use to help yourself stop is take Post-it notes and actually cover up the music beyond where you don't want to continue. So you're just going to display just a little bit of your piece. So how much is a little bit? Well, it should be no more than 3 to 5 items. And that's because the human working memory, typical amount of items that most people can retain is 3 to 5. So if you ever have to log into a website and they send you one of those codes to verify your identity, they do not send you a 45-digit long code because nobody can remember that. So what's a thing? What am I talking about? Is it a measure? Is it a chord? What is it? Well, it depends on you. It depends on how much music you can encode into one chunk of thought. If you're a better sight reader, you might be able to take in an entire chord as one chunk of information. If you're a much earlier level student and you have to work out individually what every single note of the chord is, that probably counts as 3 things for you. Once you've mastered your short chunk, then you can make it longer. Another thing that people do all the time is they start over from the beginning. They're playing along, they make a mistake, and they go back to the beginning because, well, I hear this a lot. I only can get that part right if I start way over here. And there is truth to that. There's a certain kind of part of the brain, it's called procedural memory, where it remembers the order that we do things in. So it's encoding what you need to know in sort of a sequence. And so yes, it's not possible when you're using that procedural memory to start kind of midway in the sequence. It is much easier to start at the beginning. However, it's worth the effort to learn to start in many, many different spots because your learning will be more secure. Procedural memory is not very strong, and when you're under pressure, your procedural memory is not going to be sufficient to enable you to get through the piece without having problems. I used to have a pillow on the couch in my studio, and it said, "I played it better at home." It was like this fancy embroidered pillow, and everyone loved that pillow because it was so true. So what's the solution to all of these problems? If you make a mistake, don't keep going. Stop. Circle it in the music. Or keep a notepad by the piano or a Post-it or whatever and write down where that mistake was. And you'll end up with a list of mistakes. And then you could zoom in on those specific sections and do those extra. And again, you're not going to start at the beginning and try to get to where the first mistake is and then stop and then review that mistake. No, you're going to go right to where the mistake is, do it 3 to 5 times slowly, making sure it's 100% correct. Remember your $100 tempo. You may say, well, great, now I learned all these little pieces, but I still don't have a piece of music. How do I put it together? Well, that's a whole other skill. You have to start with learning the bricks, And then you're going to join them up. You're going to use mortar and you're going to connect them up into longer and longer sections. And that's a different way of practicing. But if you never get your bricks made properly, you're never going to get anywhere at all. We are all playing piano because we love piano. And usually if a piece is more difficult, it sounds better. So it's like, well, that's the one I really like. I want to play that one. I'm more excited about that one. That's one reason folks are doing that. I think another reason is that it's very difficult to know how hard a piece is. You kind of look at it on the page, the notes look reasonably spaced out. If you're not that familiar with reading notes, it's very difficult to look at the page and see which part of this is going to be harder than which other part. Even if you're a good sight reader, you may not know how to think about what causes difficulty and be able to take from looking at the visual patterns on the page to analytically understanding what is it that's going to make this difficult for me. Some examples of things that might not be that apparent would be like if one hand has to do something completely different than the other hand. If the patterns are unusual patterns that you haven't really encountered before. If one hand has to play more than one melodic line at the same time and you're not that comfortable with that. So these sorts of difficulties, if you're not accustomed to looking for them on the page, you might not realize that they're there when you're selecting your piece. I think another reason people pick music that's too difficult is they feel like they need to take on challenges to progress. And it's not that I'm opposed to challenges. I just find that folks generally are trying to go from, walking on a flat surface to climbing Mount Everest in 2 weeks. We have to think of growth at the piano more like how a tree grows. It grows a little bit at a time. And as a pianist, if you want to develop refinement and beauty and certainty in your playing, don't be sacrificing all that and trying to go for quick growth by trying to skip steps. The other thing I'll say about that is in almost 50 years of teaching, I have found that the folks that play the most pieces are the ones that improve the fastest. So the student that says, okay, I just finished my first Clementi Sonatina, now I want to play Moonlight Sonata third movement, that person will not improve as fast as the person who's working his or her way through gradually many, many sonatinas, moving up to Mozart sonatas, gradually increasing difficulty with each piece and moving through many, many more pieces. I'm not completely sure why this is, but it's absolutely the case. So if you really want to get better faster, you should take pieces that are only a little bit harder and move through them more rapidly. Another way you can assess whether the piece is too hard for you is to try to play it through, half tempo maybe. If you can't play it about 80% accurate on the first try through, it's too hard. It needs to be something that's within your reading level, more or less, and something that has only a few new challenges in it. So if you have never ever played any kind of a trill in your entire life, you do not want to take on a piece where, for example, where you're trilling at the bottom of one hand and then you're also playing notes at the top. That's way, way, way too much. You would take on maybe a few short trills here and there. Your next piece could have a few more trills. Then maybe you gradually tackle a measure long trill. This sort of gradual layering of difficulty is what's going to accelerate your progress. Another big mistake that I see people making is thinking that if they repeat a passage enough times that they will just somehow get it. And maybe for some people that works. I mean, there are people out there who are sort of naturally kinesthetically coordinated. But I have actually not ever had a student that was kinesthetically gifted in every skill for the piano. Pretty much everyone needed some sort of instruction on certain skills. And so going at mastering physical challenges with sort of brute force repetition is asking for trouble. Two kinds of trouble. You might just get very frustrated because you can't get it. You might get discouraged. Piano's pretty hard. You don't want to be courting discouragement. And then the other kind of trouble you might get into, and this is the kind of trouble I got into, was you might be causing yourself pain or injury. And it is extremely common, pain, in playing musical instruments. It's more normal than not for pianists to have pain and injury. And I think this might be a big part of it. We kind of have this philosophy like, no pain, no gain. You gotta, just do it, the Nike slogan. Yeah, it doesn't work. The movements that you need to make are very subtle. You need to be doing the right movement at the right time, in the right size. And if you don't know what movement to do, it doesn't matter how long you practice it, you're not going to actually get better at it. And the image I like to use is if you were a long distance runner, but you were training in cement shoes, you're just not going to get very good, no matter how much you work out, and you might injure yourself. So it's important to understand what is the movement that you need to do to execute the skill that you're trying to tackle. It shouldn't feel awkward or big. So it should feel fluid, it should feel smooth, it should feel easy. It should not feel awkward, tiring, or large. The next really common mistake that I see is that people do not work on sight reading. And I think it's just that we don't understand how important it is. And I didn't really understand it until I've been teaching quite a long time. If you cannot really look at the page and see the patterns on the page, it's much harder to learn your piece. It takes much, much longer. It would be analogous to if you are trying to memorize a poem and you look at the words on the page, but you don't speak the language. And so you're memorizing the words one letter at a time. Now, of course, it takes longer to learn the words than it takes to learn the letters. There's a big gap in years between learning to read words fluently and recognizing letters. But in the long run, it is totally worth it to be able to be a fluent reader of words and or designs, chunks of musical notation. The other thing that happens, one of my students that I worked on with sight reading, he pointed this out. He said, I'd kind of read the notes and then I'd like memorize the notes and I'd look at my hands and then I'd look back up at the page and I couldn't really tell where I was on the page because I'm not that good at reading the notes. So he said, now that I'm a better sight reader, it's much, much easier for me to keep my place on the page. Even if I glance down, it's easier to look back up and see where I'm at. Staying oriented to the page and maintaining that sense of flow on the page is much, much easier if you're a better sight reader. Another mistake that I see happening all the time is that pianists don't understand the musical meaning of what they're playing. I'm going to go back to the image of the poem. Let's say I'm memorizing a poem in Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. I would have a hard time understanding which words meant what. It would be very hard for me to put expression into my recitation of the poem. A better image would be if you get a poem or a short story or whatever, and it's all just words strung together with no periods and no paragraph indentations, no chapter headings, no table of contents. Much harder to learn, much harder to understand what's happening. And it's even hard to see where the parts are. So the brain learns best when things are organized. You know, when it makes sense to your brain why this item follows that other item, it's much easier to remember it. And so if you don't understand how music is organized, where are to make the sentence analogy, where are the periods? Where are the chapter endings in my piece? One concept that's very relevant here is something called a cadence. And that would sound something like this. It's like it could be the end of the piece. So understanding what a cadence is, that tells you, that's sort of like a period in words. So being able to understand what that is exactly, being able to hear it when you play it, being able to look at look at your notes on the page and see where the cadences are, those are going to help you organize in your mind the structure of the piece. That's a very small level of detail. If you're playing, you know, Beethoven's Sonata, for example, there's not going to be only one cadence. There are going to be, by gosh, off the top of my head, 30, 100, 200, many. And some of them are more important than others. Another example of understanding how a piece is put together is what are the main ideas of the piece. So a student last week was playing the prelude from English Suite in A minor, and it has a motive, like all these motives. And she came back and she was so excited. She said, I found them all. She said, this piece is like, it's like a vampire. That motive, you can't kill it. It just keeps coming back. And she's absolutely right. That's part of the energy of the piece, is this kind of relentlessness of the motive just showing up over and over and over and over again. But it's not like it's repeating itself. The motive is there, but it's in all different flavors and sizes. Permutations of the motive are part of also of the energy of the piece. But if you don't know what a motive is, you might like the piece, but it'll be harder to figure out what to play louder, what to play softer, where are the parts of the piece. The more you can know about these things, the easier it is to make sense of the piece that you're playing, the easier it is to play it with expression, and the more enjoyable it's going to be. It's actually, I liken it to playing Where's Waldo. You know, once you know what you're looking for, it's kind of fun to look and find these things. I see students criticizing themselves for not playing with enough feeling. Playing with feeling, it goes back to the example that I was giving about reciting the poem in Chinese. If you don't understand the structure of the piece, it's very hard to understand what should be emphasized and what should be not emphasized, especially if you start playing music where there's going to be some speeding up and slowing down, like romantic style music, Chopin, Liszt, Brahms. That when do you speed up, when do you slow down? If you don't understand how the piece is put together, because you want to use your changing of tempo to signal the structure of the piece to us. And I would say the final mistake that I see people making, which is I feel sad about, is I see students criticizing themselves for not playing with enough feeling. It goes back to the example that I was giving about reciting the poem in Chinese. If you don't understand the structure of the piece, it's very hard to understand what should be emphasized and what should be not emphasized, especially if you start playing music where there's going to be some speeding up and slowing down, like romantic style music, Chopin, Liszt, Brahms. It's hard to know when to do that if you don't understand how the piece is put together, because you want to use your changing of tempo to signal the structure of the piece to us. Another skill that's important for figuring out how to interpret your piece is being able to listen to the different harmonies that the composer is using. I mean, like, this is a harmony, this is a harmony, this is a harmony. And they all have their own kind of emotional communication that they make. So sensitizing yourself to those different sounds, being able to discern what they are in the context of your piece of music, will help you in inflecting your playing so that it carries more emotion. So that's one part of learning to play with feeling. And a whole nother part is having the skills. Some of the skills that are really important to putting across emotion. One is being able to bring out the melody. Most of the time, the melody will have a lot of the emotion. It's not all of the emotion, but it's a lot of it. So if we can't hear the melody, we're not going to get your message. Another important skill is having really good pedaling. So if everything is all mushed together, we can't tell what it is you're trying to tell us. So that's kind of mushy. I'm not bringing out the melody very much. Another thing that will affect how expressive your melody sounds is slight changes in the timing. Most melodies are something somebody could sing, and the way that the voice manages bigger spaces between notes is different than the way it manages smaller spaces between notes. And so if we want a melody to sound expressive, we need to slightly delay larger intervals, and closer intervals can go more quickly. So that's an example of understanding of the structure of the piece and using a skill, which is being able to minutely vary your timing so that your melody sounds like it has more feeling. A final thing, and this is usually where I'm starting with students in terms of becoming more expressive, is making what I call mini dynamic shifts. So going back to the Bach piece, you wouldn't be playing. That's pretty much all the same dynamic. It would be nicer. So I'm a little bit accenting that one because it's on the downbeat. And that's part of the style of that that piece, which is Baroque. So that ability to play one note slightly louder or softer than the notes around it, especially when you're more like elementary, early intermediate, that's something that takes some time to develop, for sure, and some careful practicing. It's not that easy when you're first learning how to do that. The more you do it, of course, the easier it gets. All right, well, I hope that was helpful, summarizing some of these most common piano mistakes that I've seen. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, things that didn't make sense, things you'd like to see more videos about. Would love to hear from you.